Good morning and welcome to Worldwide Wisdom. Welcome to the festival of modern day miracles. That is the festival that we are celebrating this week, Thursday night and Friday. It is the festival of BaOmer, which is a very mysterious and a mystical Jewish holiday. It's the most recent of all of the Jewish holidays. The most recent of all the Jewish holidays. You know, if you think about it, there's the biblical holidays, the big guys. You know, you got Passover, Shavuos, and Sukkot, the Moses times. Then you got far more recent is, those are 3,300 years ago. You got Hanukkah. Which came first? Let me ask you a question. Hanukkah or Purim? Which came first? Purim came before Hanukkah. That's right, because Purim happened in the era of the Persian exile, when the Jewish people were exiled really by the Babylonians, which then were conquered by the Persians. That's when the Purim story happened. And a couple hundred years later, when the Greeks conquered the Persians, that's when we experienced the Hanukkah miracle. We experienced Hanukkah after the story of Purim. So the Hanukkah would have been 2,200 years ago, but the Greeks were conquered by the Romans, and that's when this story, the story of BaOmer, happened. It happened when after the destruction of our second temple in 69 CE. It was a very, very difficult time for the Jewish people. And at that time, Rabbi Akiva was alive and well, and he had established the yeshiva with 24,000 students who became the future, the leadership of the Jewish people. Mysteriously, they died in the days of the Omer, in the 32 days leading up to BaOmer, and that's why it's a period of semi-mourning. But after they finished dying on the 33rd day of the Omer, whereas everybody else, any other normal person would have just thrown in the towel when his entire life's work and all of his disciples had died, Rabbi Akiva is the paradigm of tenacity. He, on the day of BaOmer, he girds his loins and he starts all over again with 5 students. One of them is Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai. Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai, these 5 students really become the future of Judaism. And it's in very, very dangerous, precarious times. The Romans are banning, this is now, you're talking around the time of 129 CE. So the Romans, it happened after the rise of Hadrian. Trajan had already died. The evil emperor Trajan had already died. And Hadrian took over. In the beginning, Hadrian was a good guy. He came to visit Israel, and he even allowed the Jews to rebuild the temple for a short period of time until the Shomronim, which were the fake Jews, basically slandered the real Jews to Rome as if they were planning a rebellion. So Rome then canceled the plans of rebuilding the temple and put an idol in the temple. At that point, the Jews couldn't handle it, just like in the Hanukkah story, when the Maccabean revolt was a result of a idol in the temple. Here too, an idol in the temple initiated the revolt, which was the Bar Kokhba revolt, at which point the Romans, after 2.5 years in an independent Jewish state, led by Bar Kokhba and supported by Rabbi Akiva as the weapons bearer, like the Secretary of State, the Secretary of Defense of Bar Kokhba's revolt, when it was eventually quelled, the rebellion, the Romans really rubbed salt into the wound, added insult to injury, and they doubled down in their decrees, banning Shabbos, banning Bris, banning Torah study, banning the Jewish calendar, and so on and so forth. It was in this climate that Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai is one of the students of Rabbi Akiva. He actually goes to hide in a cave. For 13 years, his life is in danger, where in that cave, he writes the book of the Zohar. The book of the Zohar is the book of the Kabbalah. I have it right here. It's translated into English. Really cool. The Pritzker edition is a highly recommended edition. It's available right here in English. He wrote the book of the Zohar. Not very long, but it contains all the secrets of Jewish mysticism, which is why Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai becomes the father of Jewish mysticism. And this is 2,000 years ago. His yahrzeit ultimately ended up on which date? On BaOmer. So the same day that the students of Rabbi Akiva, the 24,000 students, stopped dying, is also the day that Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai eventually had his yahrzeit. His passing was a gushing of secrets which were coming out of him on his deathbed, and he even said, very famously, that don't call it the day that I die, don't call it the day of my sadness, call it the day of my wedding. Right? Which is why till today we speak about the righteous as the day of their passing as Yom Hilulah, which in Aramaic means the day of wedding. Yom Hilulah, if you've heard of that term. It means the day of a wedding. Why? Because their soul is reunited with God up in heaven. It's like a wedding. But on this date of Lag BaOmer, we're celebrating truly the festival of Jewish mysticism. Because on the day of one's yahrzeit, the day of one's passing, is the culmination of all of that person's achievements and accolades. Since the life of Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai was devoted to the teachings of Kabbalah, which, by the way, weren't invented by Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai. Where did they come from? They were invented by God Almighty Himself, given to Moses on Mount Sinai as an oral accompaniment to the Ten Commandments and to the written law, was the oral law, which is the revealed part of Torah, the Talmud, which is oral, and the secret Torah, the Kabbalah, which is also oral, and that was passed on, whilst the oral Torah that is revealed was passed on to wide circles, the secret Torah that was oral was passed on to close-knit circles, until the days of the Arizal. Arizal lived 500 years ago. That's 1,500 years after Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai was a closely guarded secret, the study of the Zohar, which is why it's written in a very cryptic form. The Arizal was the one who said 500 years ago that it's a mitzvah legal chokhmah. From now, it's a mitzvah to reveal this particular wisdom, and that's a different discussion as to what happened 500 years ago that represented a turning point in the trajectory of Jewish mysticism. But suffice it to say that Lag BaOmer is the festival that celebrates the father of Jewish mysticism. Again, not the inventor of it, but the one who made the executive decision to write it down. Bear in mind, this is right around the same time as the oral Torah was written down as well. Who wrote down the oral Torah? The Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda the Prince, Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi. He wrote down the oral Torah also right around just before the destruction of the temple. And the reason he did that is because he understood that because of the persecutions and the troubles that were looming upon the Jewish people, the likelihood of them being able to retain and remember and convey, to transmit the oral Torah purely in oral form was mitigated. And therefore he made the executive decision of writing down the oral Torah. Same thing happened with Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai. He too made that executive decision of writing down the Kabbalah in the form of the Zohar. The word Zohar means radiance. Now, radiance. On the day of Lag BaOmer, we're celebrating the festival of Jewish mysticism, which is, by the way, the reason why we celebrate it with bonfires. Why bonfires? Because bonfires represent the secret Torah, the Kabbalah, like a fire which a person is naturally afraid of. You see a fire, a normal person runs away, doesn't run towards it. So too, the secret Torah is something which we tend to be afraid of. It's like rabbis. People see a rabbi, what do? Rabbis and dogs, they run the other direction, right? But it's only if you're able to overcome. It's only if you're able to overcome your initial inhibition, your natural inhibition, and you say, you know what, maybe, then you tread cautiously towards it. It's then that you're able to discover that rabbis don't actually bite, and you discover that the fire is actually, if managed properly, can build, can weld, can heal, can warm, can transform your life, can fill it with fire, with light and life and warmth, right? So in exactly the same way, the secret Torah, the Kabbalah, is also one which we're able to approach with caution. And when we approach it with caution, it can actually add full color to our lives. And that's the reason why Lag BaOmer is actually the festival of miracles. It says in Hayom Yom that the Mittel Rebbe, the second Rebbe of Chabad, would go out on the festival of Lag BaOmer to the fields, as we're doing here at Chabad. We have every year an event out in the fields. We go out. We're actually having a concert on Lag BaOmer, and we're doing it here in the beautiful park at our shul. And what we do is that the Mittel Rebbe, the second Rebbe, Rabbi Dovber, the son of the Alter Rebbe, would go out on Lag BaOmer, and even though he wasn't so healthy, he would drink l'chaim, and many miracles would abound that day. People would wait all year long to experience the miracles of Lag BaOmer in terms of fertility, in terms of financial success, in terms of nachas from the kids, in terms of other blockages that people were experiencing. They would come to fulfillment on Lag BaOmer. And the question is why? What's the connection between Lag BaOmer and miracles? What's the connection between this festival of Jewish mysticism and the fact that miracles would take place during this festival? I'd like to illustrate this with a very spiritual story. A very spiritual story. The story is conveyed to us in the Medrash. The Medrash tells us that one of the students of Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai, now Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai, by the way, lived in Miron. That's where his cave was, and his center of gravity was in Miron, which is right, the mountain, I think it's one of the tallest mountains in Israel. think maybe second tallest mountain in Israel. There's an army base right on top of the mountain, very close to the city of Tzfas. From Tzfas, you can actually see the Mount of Miron. Very spiritual places where Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is actually buried in a major pilgrimage site in Israel on the day of his yahrzeit. And Arizal is all the spirit Kabbalists of the Galilee are buried over there. Many of them. Oh, Merev BaOmer. Sometimes you have 500,000 Jews over there that come to his gravesite on BaOmer. So this year, actually, I'm sure there's going to be a lot because I don't think we're having missiles from the north right now. So in the past couple of years, it's been a problem to go to BaOmer because the government didn't want to allow a large group of Jews, like 100 or 500,000 Jews, to gather in the north of Israel, which would be sitting ducks for missiles. God forbid, yeah. So I'm sure they'll be gathering there again this year. So there in Mount Meron, what happened was that one of the students of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai left the country of Israel, and when he returned, he was wealthy. He returned wealthy. So the story goes that the other students in the Medrash, the other students of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai were jealous. So what does Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai do? He calls the students together towards the valley, and then as he stands with his students in front of the valley, he says, Bika, valley, O valley, fill up with dinars of gold. What happens? The Medrash says that immediately the valley filled up with dinars of gold, and he says to his students, feel free to take whatever you want. This is the reward of your Torah study. But bear in mind that whatever you take is diminishing your portion in heaven. The students understood this and they abstained from taking anything. This is the story. That's an interesting story. The Rabbi uses this story to illustrate the uniqueness of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. What was so unique about Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is that he was one whose Torah was his entire being. Okay? The Torah was his entire being. Now, what we know about Torah is that Torah is the true source of our blessing, as the Torah states explicitly in Parshas Bechokosai, which is the end of the book of Vayikra, the very last portion, the beginning of the last portion of Vayikra, of Leviticus. It says, Im Bechokosai telecho. If I'm going to translate this literally, if you walk in my statutes, and you fulfill my mitzvahs, and I will give you rain in its time and peace in the land. So Rashi asks a question: what does it mean if you walk in my statutes? What does it mean? It says if you walk in my statutes and you fulfill my commandments. So we know it. Commandments already mentioned. So what does it mean to walk in my statutes? And Rashi explains that it means that you toil in the Torah study. If you toil in the study of Torah, sweat. And I want to ask you this question: when was the last time you perspired over Torah study? You should. Because if you want to experience God's blessings, then you got to push yourself. You got to push yourself to be able to study far more than your comfort zone. So if you toil in the study of Torah, the Torah says, and you fulfill my mitzvahs, then I will give you rain in its time and peace in the land. So what this means is that the true source of our blessing is in Torah. That's what it means. The true source of our blessings is in Torah. Now, it's only because we are in a state of exile that we do not see the immediate results of our efforts. In a healthy, normal state of existence, a person would study Torah and automatically he would see the blessing ensue. When people cry out and say, why do good people suffer? When people say, why do bad things happen to good people? They have a very good point. This is the cry of injustice. Like, God, I'm doing what you want from me, so why don't you do what we want from you? And in an ideal world, that's exactly what's supposed to happen. The problem is we don't live in an ideal world. Ever since Adam and Eve ate from the fruit of the tree of knowledge, ever since they ate from the plant of higher consciousness, they introduced a form of dysfunction into this world. A world in which by the sweat of your brow shall you eat bread. With misery shall you raise children. You will be subservient to your husband. Mortality was introduced into the world, right? These are the curses of that chapter in Genesis, right? In other words, a world which prior to the sin of Adam and Eve, the world was in free flow. You do A, you get B. Cause leads to effect. The problem is that we descended into a state of exile. We've discussed this at length with Rabbi Manis Friedman about how it was all part of the divine plan, and Eve exactly knew what she was doing when she encouraged Adam to eat from the tree, and it was a deliberate decision that they made to enter into a world that was dysfunctional so that they could fix it, because they understood that there was no purpose for them to live in a perfect world. They needed to descend into a state of darkness so that mankind would have a purpose, which God had already told them was to fix the world. But they realized they were in a world that wasn't broken. So if there was an option to lead into a world that was broken, they understood that that's what God wanted them to do. But that's a different discussion that we've had here on YouTube as well. But in a perfect world, we would have seen the immediate result of our actions. And by the way, the opening word of the Torah is Bereshit. What does Bereshit mean? In the beginning. But it also can be read as bara shis, which means created in 6. That's Aramaic. Created in 6 days. Or it could also mean the word shis also means in Hebrew, in Torah Hebrew, it means a covering. V'yosef yashis yadoi aleinecha. The Torah speaks about Jacob's upcoming death. It says Joseph will cover with his hand over your eyes. The word shis means a covering. So when it says bara shis, it means created a curtain, created a veil, created a disruption to the flow, because we're living in a world which was intended to be in a state of dysfunction, in a state of imperfection, where the righteous suffer, where the wicked prosper, where cause does not necessarily lead to immediate effect. A world in which the Rebbe would conclude almost every talk by with a cry and a demand for, we want Mashiach now, we want redemption, we're sick and tired of the state of exile. A world in which the Rebbe would pray to God for Toiv, Hanira v'Anigla, goodness that is revealed and that is apparent. You know, in Tanya, we speak a lot about hidden good. We say there's no such thing as evil, right? Velvel is a big scholar of this particular topic. We've spent many hours debating.
One day you'll get it right. Bear with you.
Tanya teaches us there's no such thing as evil. In fact, it's not the Tanya, it's the Shnei Luchos Abris. It's Rabbi Shai Levi Horowitz, who was the great Kabbalist of the Middle Ages, who actually was the one who famously wrote, Ein Ra Yered Milamayla, there's no such thing as evil that comes from above. There's only 2 kinds of good. There's revealed good, which we know what that is. And then there's hidden good, which looks like evil. It's hidden good. It's just not yet good, right? It's eventually going to be good. It's like Jerry Seinfeld says, you know, that old people in Florida, when they drive, they have, they're driving down I-95 and they have their indicator on, the right indicators on. It's not that they forgot. It's not that they forgot that they left the indicator on. It means an eventual right turn, right? That's what it means, an eventual right turn. So too, when God doesn't give us the desired results, it's just that it's not a no. It just means not yet, right? Everything will be good in the end. If it's not good, it means that it's not the end, right? So this is the world that we live in. We live in a world which is imperfect, it's dysfunctional, a world of confusion, a world of darkness and chaos. And that's why we speak about the darkness of the exile, because it's like groping in the darkness. You can't see clearly. You're trying to find the doorknob in a dark room. You're going to bump things over. You're going to hit the bedside table. You're going to hit the lamp. You're going to knock over the shade. You're going to bump into things. You're going to scrape your knee. You're going to bleed a little bit, right? Because you're in the dark. But when somebody flicks on the light, what happens? You go straight to the doorknob, no problem. This state of illumination is the world in which Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai lived in. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai himself, his entire existence was Torah, not just Torah. His entire existence was the secret part of Torah. Therefore, for him, there was no darkness. He lived in a state where there was already a state of Mashiach. I'll give an example of this. I forget who it was. I think it was the Holy Ruzhiner, Rabbi Yisrael of Ruzhin. The story goes about him that he would wake up each morning and he would open his window to smell if Mashiach had arrived yet.
Smell.
You'd have to smell, yeah. The world's going to smell different. Maybe he had to sense. I'm not sure exactly, but yeah, there is a prophecy in Isaiah that says that Mashiach will judge by the power of his olifactory. Is that the word? Olifactory. It's a factory of, yeah, okay. The olifactory. Yeah, his nose. He'll use his nose to smell, people's lineage. Anyways, why would he have to open the window? Why would the Ruzhiner need to open the window to smell if Mashiach had come? Why couldn't he smell the air in his own room, in his own house? The answer, I believe, was the Rebbe who gave this answer, is because Mashiach had already come in his Yeah, the Rebbe said this in Vata Tetzav, in the last mymer that was published in the Rebbe's lifetime. The Rebbe said that in the Rishon's home, Mashiach had already come. He was already living in a state of clarity where there was none of this darkness of the exile. The question is what's going on in the world around him. Until Mashiach comes and the rest of the world around us, we cannot find salvation within our own ivory towers. We've got to be able to bring redemption and a redemptive state of consciousness to the world at large. And that's why you needed to open the window to smell if Mashiach had come. And this is, when we understand this idea, when you realize that that certain Kabbalists of history were people who had reoriented their existence, not only from body to soul, which is a challenge that the Tanya challenges us to reorient. Tanya wants us to move from orienting our existence to our body, which is a default state, to orienting with our soul, which is an eternal existence. But even more than that, what Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai did, he reoriented from his soul to Torah. So he actually, his very existence was Torah. Another example of this is the Mittel Rebbe, about whom I spoke earlier, the miracles of BaOmer that took place in the fields. The Mittel Rebbe, it says about him that if you'd cut open a vein in his arm, God forbid, then what would come out would not be blood, but chassidus. It's an interesting expression. Sounds like exaggerated, obviously, but it sounds like hyperbole. But when a Rebbe repeats such a statement, what it means is, the point is to say, is that his very being was chassidus. It wasn't that it was an optional add-on. It wasn't an extra hobby that he did in his spare time. It wasn't even his full-time job. It was his very fiber of his existence. And when a Jew is able to reach a state like that, when you're able to reach a state where you reach that kind of consciousness, that kind of awareness, where the study of Chassidus is not something you do twice a week, or once in a while, but rather it's something which you're sleeping over. I want to challenge you. And I often ask people, what kept you up last night? In other words, and I'm more specific, I say, what Torah study kept you up last night? Which part of Torah were you unable to sleep because of? It's an interesting state of being. I want people to think about the question, because my point is that, if you're studying a mymer, for example, if you're studying, if you're studying some form of Chassidus, of Torah, then you want it to be able to embrace every fiber of your being. I remember when in Chabad, we have a custom that we memorize a discourse and we repeat it. Every Shabbos or on your birthday. So amongst Hasidic communities, somebody repeats a mymer discourse by heart, by memory, every Shabbos. So I remember I was once in Melbourne, Australia, and where I got my rabbinical degree, and there, someone asked me, says, "No, Rav David, would you do the mymer today? So you're learning all week the mymer, the discourse. Maybe you could share it with us, by heart." And I said, "I can't." So the guy looks at me like, "Why not?" I said, "Because I don't agree with it yet." He looked at me like I fell off the moon.
And he took your yarmulke away from you.
I said, I don't agree with it yet. It's not something which I was able to really connect with, and I wasn't able to say that I properly understood it, and I wasn't comfortable repeating it. Now, that's not an excuse, honestly. You can still repeat it. Maybe somebody else will explain it to you. I didn't have the das. Exactly. That's what I meant. Yes. Das is, I might have had it in Bina and comprehension, but I hadn't meditated on it enough to be able to feel it. And I wanted to repeat the mymer from a place of heart instead of a place of mind. When I give a sermon, if it's coming from my mind, it's going to hit your mind in one ear and out the other. But if I'm successful to allow it to come from the heart after das meditation, then it's going to hit typically the heart, and that's going to leave an impression. Right? So that's the kind of Chassidus that I want to be studying. And it's interesting because, just incidentally, it says in the Zohar that the generation that will welcome the Mashiach, it says that the generation, this is the Zohar, Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai, it says that the generation that will welcome the Mashiach, which is our generation, because remember, the Rebbe promised us the Mashiach is coming in our lifetimes, is the same as the generation of Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai. That's what it says in the Zohar. It's a little cryptic.
I thought it was the generation that wandered.
That's a different Zohar. That's a different piece of Zohar. But what I'm trying to bring out to you is over here is just like Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai was living in this world where there was no state of exile, where there was no dysfunction. He was living in a world where cause leads to effect, where Torah study leads to prosperity. And that's why when the student returned wealthy and his other students were jealous, what does he say to them? Why were they jealous? Why were they jealous? Because they were of lower consciousness. They weren't there yet. They were like, why does he have and not I? Evil eye, right? They were jealous. They were envious. They were low-level consciousness where they were looking at others. Remember, winners focus on winning. Losers focus on winners, right? So the winners, the higher consciousness is focused on the goal, but the losers are focused on the competition, right? So what happens here is Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is living in a state of being where he says, guys, you want money? No problem. Come. I'll take you to the valley. And he says, valley, fill up with golden dinars. And what happens is that the valley fills up because he was in his world, miracles were default. Because in his world, nature was not supreme. Nature was not supreme. Now, I know this sounds like a crazy concept. I know. I apologize. Just bear in mind, folks, this is a huge debate that Aristotle had with the sages of Israel. For 2,000 years, people thought 2,000 years. People thought that any rabbi that argues with Aristotle is a fool. That's what they thought. You cannot argue with Aristotle because Aristotle is the gold standard of science. Can't argue with science with a capital S, capital C, capital IENCE, right? You can't argue with Aristotle, who is wisdom impersonated, right? Aristotle said something very interesting. He believed in God, by the way, but he also believed in the eternity of the universe. He believed that the universe always was, and that there was no beginning to the universe. Therefore, the problem with this mindset of Aristotle, the problem with the mindset of Aristotle is that if you're going to take the Aristotelian view, and you're going to say that the world always existed, you know what that means? It means that God doesn't govern nature. It means that God doesn't govern the universe. It means that God cannot control, change destiny. It means fatalism. It means determinism. It means that we are slaves to our fates and we cannot appeal to God Almighty to change it because the universe is like God. It's like its own God, right? And you cannot change anything. So again, for thousands of years, we believe, scientists believe, that Aristotelian theory was correct until about 100 years ago, when Aristotle was thrown out the window. Aristotle was thrown out the window. People need to understand this. When today, all scientists believe in the Big Bang Theory, right? What is the Big Bang Theory? The Big Bang is a slap in the face to Aristotle. That's what it is. The Big Bang Theory means that somehow, miraculously, nobody can explain why, but the universe suddenly self-created, right? Which means that there was a beginning. And the minute that you say that there was a beginning, you've thrown Aristotelian theory out the window, right? Which vindicates the rabbis for 2,000 years that were arguing against Aristotle until they were blue in the face and they were humiliated by the church and so on and so forth, right? Remember, who was it? Galileo. Remember Galileo? They forced him to drink hemlock. No, who was it? The guy that argued with Galileo about the central part of the universe. Who was it? They poisoned him. Whatever. Hemlock. Anyways, they gave him hemlock. Anyways, bottom line is, where am I going with this? Is that Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai lived.
Who's up first?
Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai lived in a mindset where nature could be changed. The course of nature could be changed. Now, I know that it sounds ridiculous because we're coming with an Aristotelian mindset. For 2,000 years, we've been indoctrinated, brainwashed to believe.
Take it out. Hey, talk a little louder.
For 2,000 years, we've been brainwashed to believe that nature cannot be changed. Think about that. That is an Aristotelian error. It's based on a mindset that's never been properly cleansed from our DNA.
Havaya can change it.
That's right. Havaya can change anything. The Jewish mindset is that God can change anything. So the question is, which world do you live in? Do you live in a world where nature reigns supreme, Aristotelian view, which has been debunked? Or do you live in a world where God reigns supreme, where there is a default setting of nature, but the God can intervene at any time? Most people obviously live in the former place. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai lived in the latter space because he was not just the teacher and the progenitor of, or the one who brought the secrets of Kabbalah to the world, but also because that was his very identity. It was every fiber of his being. And that's the reason why Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai The Rebbe says we can understand who he was from that story of the golden coins in the valley. Because you want to see the results of your actions? No problem. It's not that way practically, because that's not what God wants. The world isn't ready for Mashiach just yet. Mashiach exists in my room, in my house, was saying Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, but not yet in the world at large. We need to share this wisdom with the rest of the world. And of course, what does it mean in the Zohar when it says that the generation that will welcome Mashiach is the same as the generation of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai? What it means is that just like Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai in his little world lived in a world where nature was subservient to Torah, we will be able to bring that to the world at large. We will live in a world which is saturated with miracles wherever you turn, and we're actually seeing that already. That I think that in our days we're seeing just even the survival of Israel. You know, again, we've seen miracles in the past couple of weeks, months, and year or two. I mean, think about it. Iran. Remember Iran? They fired in the greatest shower of ICBMs in history was rained upon Israel, not once but twice. One was last Passover, one was just after Passover, right? And in both cases, 0 missiles hit Israel. This was the most vicious, aggressive attack of intercontinental ballistic missiles in the history of the universe, and not even one hit Israel.
Except that the Captain Houthi almost hit the airport.
Almost hit the airport. It almost hit the airport. My friend, Rabbi Shner Erchman from Chabad of Tallahassee, he was in the airport. Okay, he was inside the airport. And he was taking a video. I said to him, what were you doing taking a video? He's taking a video, and suddenly it's like, you see the video went viral, and you see out the window a Houthi rocket from Yemen landing 350 meters away. I mean, if that's considered a direct hit, according to when you come from 2,000 kilometers away, right? It's considered the margin of error, right? But the miracle was, imagine that hit the building. Imagine that it hit the plane. I mean, the casualties are astounding. We're living in miraculous times. Think Six-Day War. Think what could have happened October 7th. Think of what could have happened October 7th. Why did Hamas and Hezbollah not work together in tandem, invading from all different directions? What would have happened if the Palestinians in Judea and Samaria would have invaded at the same time as October 7th came in from Hamas in Gaza? I mean, we're living in miraculous times over here because no longer are we the Jews of the Middle Ages, who were humiliated, who were forced expulsions and forced conversions and tortures and other stuff like that. Today, we're living in a free world where you can be a Jew and you're able to be respected and dignified, and we can spread a message on YouTube like this. Imagine if you did this on YouTube, this kind of a message, 500 years ago. It was like you go straight to jail, straight to the torture rack.
YouTube,
yeah, you'd be ahead of the game, right?
You'd be ahead of the game.
There actually is a story, by the way, of Rabbi Yitzchak. There's a story of Rabbi Yitzchak was a sage in Paris who had a candle that didn't burn with fire. 500 years ago. Interesting story. Maybe one day we'll get there. But my bottom line is, I want to just conclude by saying this. I want to say that the reason why BaOmer is the festival of miracles, and I want to end up with an amazing story for you. The reason why BaOmer is the festival of miracles is because it manifests the energy of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is the embodiment of the Kabbalah. Kabbalah is a light that cannot be darkened. Because his existence was one of that kind of Torah light, the secrets of Jewish mysticism, of Kabbalah, of the Zohar. Therefore, when he needed coins, he got coins, right? It's just that the world wasn't ready for it, so it was a bit of an anomaly. But in that mindset, the day of BaOmer is the day of miracles. That's why BaOmer is the day of miracles. And the way that we are able to tap into that energy, how can we tap into that energy? How can we expedite the redemption? How can we experience miracles in our own life? Very simple, by studying the teachings of the secrets of Torah. When we study the teachings of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, the teachings of the Zohar, by the way, this is exactly the definition of the Chabad movement. Chabad is not a denomination of Judaism, it's a library. Chabad is a library of wisdom of Jewish mysticism. It's Jewish mysticism explained in a rational way. When you read that Jewish mysticism library and when you understand it and then you meditate on it, you go through the steps of Chachma Bin Adas, idea, understanding, and feeling. Now what happens is that you too, like Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, have made Chassidus a part of your being. And the more you study, the more you identify, the more you orient yourself with it, the more you're bringing miracles into your own life. Yeah, the Tanya, exactly. Now, I want to just conclude with a beautiful story. When the Rebbe first became Rebbe in 1951, I think it was 1951, the first BaOmer, the story is told by Rabbi Yosef Goldstein, I believe. I believe he's the father of the guy who was shot in Poway, San Diego. A couple years ago, I remember there was a rabbi shot, lost his finger, right? So I think it's his father, maybe his uncle, maybe his grandfather, I don't know. Anyway, so what happened was that there was a Lag BaOmer parade. The Rebbe always wanted a parade on Lag BaOmer where the children would parade in the streets. On Eastern Parkway, there was some sort of a parade. And the previous Rebbe, no, sorry, it must have been before 1951. It was because the previous Rebbe was still alive. The previous Rebbe passed in 1950. So this would have happened in the 40s. So the Rebbe was standing on a chair, from what I understand. He wasn't yet Rebbe, and he was sort of addressing the parade, When in front of 770, if you're familiar with 770, it's like 3 different columns. There's the 3 floors and 3 columns, right? So on the second floor was the office of the previous Rebbe. Now the previous Rebbe had been tortured by the Soviets. He was in a wheelchair, so he wasn't really mobile very much. So he had opened the window. The window had opened, and it was clear that he was watching the parade. But then at some point, a second window opened. And when the Rebbe saw the second window open, the Rebbe turned white. But the Rebbe continued the parade. Later on, somebody asked the Rebbe, well, who was at the second window? I mean, nobody was with the previous Rebbe then. So who was at the other window? And the Rebbe explained, he said, as he mentioned the story, an interesting story. We say, on Friday nights, you'll notice that in many shuls in the world, they sing, V'shamru b'nei Yisrael, right? Et Shabbat. You know what I'm talking about? V'shamru. Sure. Just before the Amidah on a Friday night, they'll actually sing V'shamru, which is like some sort of a Kiddush, a summary of Kiddush. They'll sing it on a Friday night before the... Here. Where do they do it? I'm pretty sure they do it just before the Amidah on a Friday night. Yeah, here it is. So, yeah, Shomrei Shabbat, right? Now, in our Siddur, it appears at the bottom of page 165, but without vowels. It's very interesting. It appears in the book without vowels. Why is it without vowels? Because you're not supposed to read it. And it says, while many recite the following paragraphs, the Chabad custom is not to recite them, for they might be considered an interruption in prayer. So the Rebbe explained, when they asked him who was at the window, he said like this. He said that when the Alter Rebbe put together our Siddur, the Alter Rebbe, the first Rebbe of Chabad, put together our Siddur, his good friend and Mechutin, the one whose children married each other, his Mechutin asked him, Alter Rebbe, why are you leaving at V'shamru? Don't you know that when the Jews recite V'shamru on a Friday night, even the angels dance? The Alter Rebbe responded, fair enough that even the angels dance when the Jews say V'shamru, but not at every fair, not at every event, at every party do we need to be present. Now, that was the answer of the Alter Rebbe, things which are way beyond our ability to understand. But then the Rebbe concluded, after mentioning the story, concluded by saying, at that fair, the Alter Rebbe said, we don't need to dance. But at this fair, the Alter Rebbe did dance, or did attend. In other words, the Rebbe was insinuating that in the 1940s, on Eastern Parkway in Brooklyn, New York, the Alter Rebbe, who was buried in Haditch in White Russia, had somehow shown up to see the Jewish children rallying on Lag BaOmer through the window. Now, obviously, nobody could see him. Maybe only the Rebbe could see him because the Rebbe turned white. But these are things that are spiritual. These are of a next level existence. But suffice it to say that Lag BaOmer is a very, very holy day. It's a very holy day. It's a very spiritual day, very mystical day. And the way to connect with that day is by showing up to the Lag BaOmer event, right? By experiencing the spirituality of the event, saying L'chaim. You're supposed to say L'chaim outdoors in the fields, right? Toast to the Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai. Commit your connection, increase your connection to the study of the secret part of Torah, to the study of Chassidus, to the study of the Zohar, to the teachings of our Rebbes. And as you do that, then we too, God willing, will experience miracles, not only in our personal lives, but miracles for the world at large, where the whole world will rise to the awareness of Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai, where just like the valley was able to be filled up with coins, so too our entire world will be able to see the fulfillment of God's blessings in every respect. There'll be no more hate. There'll be no more competition. There'll be no more war, no more jealousy. The world's entire occupation will be to rise higher in the connection to God, to know God, and may that happen immediately. Amen.
Amen.